Hey, Fitheads, welcome to another episode of Sharing Our Pairings. This is Sharing Our Pairings, episode 34, DRAM Cask number 4, brought to you by DRAM Cigars. I'm your host, John the Cigar Surgeon, broadcast live around the world and rebroadcast on podcast, wherever you might listen to it on iPhone, Android, or hopefully the Cigar Federation app. I'm joined here, as always, with my co-host, Robbie Raz. Rob, what is going on, brother?
Things are good, man. You left something out of the title, though.
What did I leave out?
This show is now broadcast around the world in the Armed Forces Radio Network.
No joke.
Absolutely. So we're going out to millions of ears out there in the world, the people who are keeping us safe. And as I always like to say on Cigar Chat, that everybody in the military is built to do something that I'm not built to do. And I appreciate everything that you guys do, and thank you for risking your life to protect our freedoms and everything around the world. So, yeah, as of this week, broadcast around the world in the Armed Forces Radio Network, and to celebrate our first show on the Armed Forces Radio Network, I don't have any headphones. So let's hope that we don't get any feedback.
Bam. That's just how we do it here on Sharing Our Pairings. We just roll live. We don't care. No rules. Except we don't really cuss, which is probably, for the best, since as I'm sure all the people in the listening in the Armed Forces Radio Network laugh that, it's okay to be shot at, but it's not okay to listen to swearing because whatever. But I get it. It's all good.
Yeah, we tend to keep it clean anyway, so that's good.
We do.
That's a good thing. Man, the bings, I apologize for the bing. I turned it off, and I don't know how to options.
Just got to put that on silent, dog. But while you're doing that, of course, today we're pairing the DRAM Cigars Cask number 4. As you can see by that lovely band, if you can see it, sun is shining here, which is nice. The cool thing about their bands, we kind of talked about this in previous shows, they've got all the deets on the band there. So, they say the whiskey profile, that it's, and I like how it's spelled whiskey with an E, very American. It's intended to be paired with a woody, smoky whiskey. Profile of the cigar is rich and intense, and the strength of the cigar is medium full. I think what sets this apart from the previous offerings, it's of course got that Connecticut broadleaf. Got that broadleaf, son. And
it's the sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
yeah.
But I do anyway.
Please do.
The wrapper has a huge impact on the cigar. Huge.
Big time.
In comparison to the other DRAM offerings that we've had, the sweetness from this wrapper is quite evident, and I like it.
And I'm not sure if my taste buds are just really enjoying the whiskey, but I'm actually not finding it as peppery as I would have. Like I was kind of anticipating it to be, that definitely that sweet broadleaf, but then that it's oftentimes got a leathery, peppery bite to it, and I'm not really getting that. But it's good, and I'm not one to hesitate on getting into the whiskey, so I've been kind of, as you can see, drinking, and it's
You've been cheating
so far. I'm cheating.
You've been cheating.
I can do whatever I want. What are the podcast police going to come and arrest us?
Yeah, that's a good point. To describe the profile as rich and intense, I think is a good way to go. There isn't a whole lot of spice in here.
No.
At least that I'm getting. I think you and I are kind of on the same page there. It's a really rich, kind of meaty profile. It's got some chewy, sweet notes to it, some almost like a molasses type flavor that kind of a classic Maduro profile, really, but a bit smokier for me.
I like your description of chewy, because that's how I would describe it as well. I take a puff and I kind of roll the smoke around in my mouth, and then I kind of sit there a bit and kind of gum on it a bit, almost like it's got that, that it's that broadleaf that just sticks around. It's not like DRAM Cask number 1, where it's got that very clean profile. You take a draw, and then you let the smoke go, and there's nothing really left afterwards. With the broadleaf, you kind of it's with you for a little while between the draws.
Yeah, it's the flavor's lingering. It's nice. But you're right. There really isn't, and it didn't really occur to me, but there's almost like no spice to this at all.
No.
Not on the tongue, not on the retrohale at all. The retro is really, really smooth.
And what's interesting is when I was smelling the foot, as professional reviewers are prone to do, I actually picked up.
Get it right up in there.
No, don't do that while it's lit. if for those of our listeners who are not watching me, do not put a lit cigar near your nose or your beard, because it is bad times. No, on the foot I could pick up some spicy, like some really peppery spice, and I'm really not getting that on the flavor profile, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean we're about what 2/3? No, not 2/3. 1/3 of the way through, give or take. The ash in this thing is really really strong in the middle, but maybe there's a little bit of spice building on the tongue, not a lot. And much like the other DRAM offerings, I think the cigar is very, very smokable on its own. But I'm really curious to see how it's going to pair with these. So let's jump in, because we might run out of cigar by the time we get to the end here.
Yeah, we're kind of. I mean, I kind of, because it's this one's this is a Toro, so I was anticipating a good 2 hours, but I mean we're just puffing, going to town on this, and it's burning pretty good. Yeah. So we kind of have some overlap on whiskeys today. I kind of wanted to keep some of the whiskeys the same so we could talk about the flavor profiles. The first whiskey, of course, we're going with today is different. So do you want to talk about your first whiskey first? I know this has become sort of one of your favorites.
Yeah, it's, to be honest, if you follow on Instagram, follow me on Instagram, at Robbie Raz on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, you would see my post the other day about all the whiskey samples. John picked up these little bottles, and what are these, like 2-ounce bottles?
Yeah.
And this one is Chichibu Ichiro the Peated, which is, if you follow the show, you know that we've talked about it before, and it's fantastic. So John brought a bunch of samples to me at IPCPR in this little box, and it's a box, I'll throw it in the bag, whatever. I didn't really think about it until I got home, and I opened it, and thank heaven none of them spilled, because they're all, I mean, the lids on these are all really tight. But there was like 40 bottles in there.
1 or 2 bottles.
How many?
1 or 2.
Well, yeah, 1 or 2, yeah. And I took a picture with my new camera that John also brought for me in exchange for American dollars. And I couldn't get all of them in the shot. Like, I spread them out to look all fancy, got all artsy with it, wanted shadows and things, and couldn't get them all in the shot. So I've got a ton of stuff to play with from John. But he knew that I liked this Ichiro the Peated. We were with Victor Vitale at IPCPR, and he was able to call somebody and find a bottle somehow.
That was miraculous, actually.
He's funny, I mean,
guy.
Yeah, he called this guy, and I've looked for a bottle for months. And he just gets on the phone. He's like, yeah, hey, you got it? Oh, yeah, you got one. Okay, good. Apparently, the shop that he knows, whatever, they did all the Chichibu guys were there, and they did a tasting. But we're going to get Victor, who I think is tuning in, actually, from he's on a bike ride. So I hope he's not really watching. Maybe he's just listening. But we're going to have Victor on the show as well soon. So John picked the Chichibu Peated, and while I was happy that I'm going to be drinking it, I was like, I kind of wanted to save it and drink it. So I was a little. He brought it, but there's still a price to pay. I have to do it on the show. But it's a fantastic whiskey, Japanese whiskey, founded. And I've got some notes here, and these notes are courtesy of John because you guys know me well enough to know that I don't prepare all that much. So let's see. It's founded in 2004. Chichibu was founded in 2004 by Ichiro Akuto in Chichibu City, in Saitama Prefecture, Japan. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's all separated by prefectures, so it's not like counties. They have prefectures.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit different everywhere. It's hot and humid in the summer, and it's below 0 in the winter, which speeds up the aging. Really? That's interesting. Yeah. They incorporate some local barley, and everything's malted locally. And you put some numbers in here. It's 50.5% alcohol by volume, and I don't know what 59.6 ppm is.
Well, that's a good question, Rob, and that really takes us to naturally our first question by Bob Dog, which is he was reading a description of Chichibu the Peated, and he says it's distilled in 2010 from heavily peated 59.6 ppm malt. What does that mean? What does that mean?
That's a great question.
It's a great question, and thank you, Bob Dog, for asking that question. I was really hoping someone was going to ask, because ppms is really an integral part of when you talk about peated whiskey. If you guys have tuned into our beer shows, and I know you have, because I know you're a dedicated audience, we've talked about IBUs when we're drinking IPAs. And IBU is the International Bitter Unit, which kind of gives you a sense of how bitter or how hoppy a beer is. And this is a very similar measure. So very simply put, ppm is a measure of phenols, and phenols are the component that gives the smoky tar, burning rubber element to whiskey. And just like IBUs, the higher the number, the more peaty, smoky, intense that whiskey is going to be, have that component. Now, maybe just to nerd out a little bit, what, I'm sure people out there are like, what is peat? Well, peat is essentially decaying vegetation. It's compacted decaying vegetation. It's actually found around the world, but Scotland's full of it. So like if you go to the Islay region, the Islay of Scotland, the whole island is covered in peat, like meters and meters of peat. And if you're a Scot and you're like, well, do I build my house out of wood, or do I burn the wood for fuel, for heat, or do I just burn this peat? Well, that's a no-brainer. You're not going to build a house out of peat. So peat was a fuel source. And that's how everyone cooked. So, I mean, if you imagine going back a couple hundred years, you have a stew in Scotland, it probably tasted like burning tires. And I mean, I'd be down with that. But so essentially what it is this compacted matter that really is on its way to becoming coal over, like, give it another million years and it'd be coal. So it's an excellent fuel source when you dry it out. And back in the day when they had distilleries, the only way to dry out the barley and really, and on top of that, to fire the big stills was to use peat. I mean, there's no such thing as pipe natural gas or steam heating, which is what largely is used today. So the natural side effect of using peat to dry out your barley was the peat smoke added this element to the barley. And of course today, because we're all sciencey, that can be measured. You can tell exactly how many ppms are in your barley, so you get a sense of just how peaty this the whiskey is going to be.
So is that on a scale from 1 to 100?
It isn't. It's because it's parts per million. So you could have over 100. There's whiskeys out there like the Smokehead, which I think is 120 or 140. I actually opened a bottle of that, and the girlfriend cleared the room because she said it was like I lit a tire on fire in the center of the room. So, I thought it smelled delightful. But.
Yeah, when you say burning tires, you don't make it sound very pleasant. There's if you've been to Ireland, there's a lot of peat in Ireland too, and everything smells that way, and I kind of like it. I don't think it smells like burning tires. I mean, there's an element of that to it, but to me, it just smells kind of earthy and tough. Yeah. Like if I'm burning peat, I'm kind of a badass. It's just the smell that it has, and we can say that, by the way.
Oh, nice. Okay.
As far as I know, anyway, until they tell us we can't. I listen to what they say on the radio, and if you're not listening to like Howard Stern or something, he's still on, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Well, he's on like Sirius or whatever, if that still exists, so he can say whatever he wants. But anyway, moving on. So we've talked about each of the peat in the past. Fantastic, really nice profiles. Not too peaty, like a Lafroig or something like that, or some of the things we're going to get into. But there is that element of peat into it. The flavors that I'm getting from it, and I can't really bounce these off of John because he's not drinking it tonight. It tastes a lot sweeter to me than it did in the past with the cigar. I feel like the sweetness from the cigar is kind of impacting the whiskey. I don't feel like the flavors from the cigar are getting changed much at all. The experience from the cigar is very similar, but it's acting a little bit on this on the whiskey, and I almost feel like it's kind of rolling over the whiskey a little bit, which I don't think is going to be a problem with our next two, but with this one, I think the flavors from this whiskey might be a bit delicate for this cigar.
And I kind of thought that might be the case, but I figured we'd go ahead anyways because I have lots more Chichibu where that came from, and I'm only a short flight away from.
It's fantastic, man. It really is. It's one of my favorites that we've had, and the pairing is good. But I think in a situation like this, if I were sitting down to pair with something, this isn't the bottle that I would reach for. And maybe that's just me being frugal and trying to squirrel away the stuff that I really like. But it's the performance of the whiskey compared to the performance of the cigar is not really, they're not really on par with each other.
No, I got you. I mean, I think the Chichibu is really delicate, which is unusual for a peated whiskey. Normally, you know, when you think about a peated whiskey like a Lagavulin or a Lafroig or an Ardbeg or, you know, Bowmore or whatever peated whiskey is out there, you kind of think of it as this beefy, punch you in the face whiskey. And I think that's where the Chichibu is quite elegant, is that it incorporates, yeah.
That's what was unique about it. And that's what I really loved about it. And now when I'm with the flavors from the cigar and pairing it with the whiskey, it makes the whiskey taste average, and it's not an average whiskey. So I feel like we're doing it a bit of a disservice.
Fair enough. Well, I'm drinking a whiskey that is pretty much in regular rotation. As soon as a bottle is gone from my from my whiskey door, whatever you want to call it, whiskey cabinet, I immediately replace it. And this is Lafroig Quarter Cask. It took me a while to get into the PD end of the spectrum. We'll talk a bit about that when we talk about some of these questions. But the Lafroig Quarter Cask, if you want a smoky whiskey, if you want a peaty whiskey, for the money, I don't know that there's a better peated whiskey out there, and I'm going to throw that out there. You know, it can be had between $40 and $50, which is insanely low to me.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, on sale, I think I can pick it up for $38, which I kind of feel like I'm robbing the place when I do. It's double matured in American oak barrels. So after the initial maturation, they put it in a quarter. So the reason they call it a quarter cask is they put it in a quarter cask, which, as you can imagine, is quarter the size of a regular American oak cask. And the reason they do that is because it speeds up maturation. So they take that cask, they put it in their warehouse to age, and the warehouse is situated right near the Atlantic Ocean. So the thinking there is that the Atlantic Ocean is imparting this sea quality to the whiskey through the oak, through the wood. Because it's a smaller cask, there's increased contact. And anytime you have increased contact with the wood, you really are speeding up the maturation process, because there's more interaction between the whiskey and the wood. They describe the tasting notes as deep, complex, smoky with a gentle sweetness. You know, it was launched in 2004. It's, as you can see, there's no age on the bottle. There's no age statement on this bottle. So, you know, for those who are kind of only drinking whiskeys that have an age statement, this is a classic example of a no age statement whiskey that's delicious. And like I said, the moment my whiskey Lafroig Quarter Cask runs out, I immediately buy another one. It's pretty good value too, because it's 48%, which is good value. Normally paying that little for a whiskey, you'd expect it to be 40 or 43. You'd expect it to be watered down. And it's only coming in at 45 ppm, but you wouldn't know that taking a sip of this, because this is definitely that, you know, you can smell the sort of creosote rubber, but then underneath it, there is this heathery sweetness. And definitely, you know, with all Lafroigs, I get this sort of briny ocean saltiness, like you're standing on a beach at the Atlantic Ocean sipping whiskey. And I think this does pair, and I think this is one of the featured whiskeys that's on the dramcigars.com website. They have a Lafroig Quarter Cask, and I think it's a no-brainer pairing. This goes really well because the saltiness of the whiskey contrasts really nicely against the sweetness off the broadleaf, and the peaty isn't overpowering. It's, you know, the salt is complementary, and I think the are contrasting, and the peaty is complementary, and I think it works really well for me. It's going to take another delicious sip there because it's so good. One thing to mention about Lafroig is that they do malt their own barley, which is rare, because malting your own barley is a pain in the ass, because apparently we can say ass. It's very labor intensive. I mean, you're literally shoveling barley for like 8 to 12 hours, which is a hassle. It's at a time where they're being pressured for finances. You're paying a guy to shovel barley. That's a pretty big labor investment. But they do their own barley malting and firing and peating. So which I think is kind of cool. It's kind of got a little bit of romance to it. The last whiskey we drink today is actually gets the because they're a smaller distillery, they get their barley from a different location. A little bit about Lefroy before we take our station break here. They are an Islay distillery. Everything we're drinking today is Islay. So Islay distilleries, you've got Ardbeg, Lagavulin, Lefroy, Port Ellen, which is now closed, and Port Ellen does malts barley for all the other distilleries. Founded in 1815, along with most of the other Islay distilleries. Water source is the Kilbride Dam. Water source is very important. They distill 2.7 million liters a year. John, what does that mean? Well, it's 713,000 Freedom gallons, which is a lot for a distillery located on a small island. That's a lot. Yeah.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to turn the bing off.
No worries. I just turned my phone off if that's the case.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Since I picked up this new computer, it somehow synced with my phone. So whenever I get a call, it comes up on my computer. When I get those are text messages that are coming through on my computer.
Nice.
As a little iChat thing. And that was Victor. He was he was asking if you could show the Chichibu bottle.
Yeah. You want to talk for a bit and I'll go grab the bottle?
No.
Okay. Oh, and I think Rob might have just frozen, which is kind of funny. So I'm going to take this moment to say, Sharing Our Pairings, episode 34, DRAM Cigars, is brought to you by DRAM Cigars. Visit dramcigars.com, check out DRAM. They've got 4 different cigars to choose from, something for every palate, and they are the ultimate cigar for whiskey pairing. And this show is sponsored by DRAM Cigars. Thanks very much. So today we're talking about whiskey pairing. This is our 4th in this series, and today we're doing some peated whiskeys. I'm doing the Lefroy Quarter Cask, which is pretty delicious, and Rob is doing the Chichibu, which is a Japanese whiskey. I'm actually going to switch over to a question here while we wait for Rob to hop back in the show. So we've got a question from Harley Holmes, and Harley wants to know, why is Japanese whiskey winning so many awards? Well, I don't know that it is, first of all. I think when you look at whiskey awards, and we certainly talk about this all the time when we talk about cigars, is that taste is very subjective. And I don't think that's any less the situation when we talk about whiskey. You're talking about a beverage that's extremely subjective. So do I think that Japanese whiskey deserves to win awards? Absolutely. I think that outside of Scotland, I don't, no disrespect to some of the other countries. Hey, welcome back. We're just talking about why Japanese whiskeys win so many awards. Yep. You're good. Anyways, yeah, so they make some of the most authentic Scottish whiskey outside of Scotland, and they've taken great care to ensure that the whiskey they're making is authentic, that the processes are authentic, and in fact, in a lot of cases, when they produce Japanese whiskey, they're doing it in ways that have long been abandoned by a lot of Scottish distilleries because it's either too labor intensive, or there's just a more modern way to do it. So do I think it's deserving of many of the awards? Absolutely. And, if you have the opportunity to try out Japanese whiskey and you enjoy whiskey in general, I think it's a no-brainer. Sometimes there's a price to go with that, unfortunately. I think there's a premium because it is obviously being shipped over from Japan. But if you have the opportunity to try out different Japanese whiskeys, I'd recommend it, absolutely. So we're going to go on to a question from On here. And On is asking, what do you have to say to folks who can't really handle the likes of Lefroy and Ardbeg? Shouldn't people try things till they learn to appreciate them? Well, that is an interesting approach. I think the problem with forcing someone to try Lefroy and Ardbeg, it's like kids. If you force them to try vegetables they don't like, I think there's a pretty good chance that what you're going to end up with is someone who really hates Lefroy and Ardbeg. And certainly I would say that when I started out drinking whiskey, I was not at all a fan of hey, Rob.
Sorry.
No, that's all good. I was just doing some questions here. We had some technical difficulties. So On was asking, what do we have to say to folks who can't really handle the likes of Laphroaig and Ardbeg? And his comment was, shouldn't people try things till they learn to appreciate them? And I think that's probably the wrong approach. When I first tried Laphroaig and Ardbeg, I absolutely detested Islay whiskeys, and my recommendation is, if you want to get into the PD end of the spectrum, start out with a Bowmore. When you enjoy some of the peatier Bowmores, move up to a Talisker 10, and I would say Talisker is a great. I call it a Islay whiskey with training wheels because it's smoky instead of peaty, which is kind of nice. So instead of getting that sort of creosote tar, tirey taste, you really get like almost a campfire smoke in your mouth. And the other one I would recommend from there is an Oban 14. And an Oban 14 sort of incorporates those characteristics, but with a little bit more of that briny, oceany quality. So certainly, if you want to give a shot to Laphroaig, but I wouldn't recommend it as a starter whiskey because it might just blow your palate out.
That's exactly how I started with with heavily peated scotches, Islay scotches.
Wow.
My wife brought home a bottle of like the standard bottle, the 10-year. I don't know if it's cask strength or whatever it is, the basic intro Laphroaig. I had no idea what it was. She brought it home one night, and I remember we were watching the movie we were watching was called The American, with kind of a noir type film with George Clooney. And I remember she poured it, and I smelled it, and I was like, "You gotta be kidding me! I'm gonna drink this." Like at first, I didn't like it, and sorry, they're firing up their hogs across the street. I didn't really like it, but she bought the whole bottle, and I wasn't going to tell her that I didn't like it. So I pretended to like it, and I pretended a few times that week just so she would see me drinking it. And then I figured I'll put it in the back of the car, and I won't have to drink it anymore. But by the end of the week, I really liked it. And then by a month and a half later, the bottle was gone. So that was I just jumped right in.
Oh, there you go. So maybe there is some thought to just powering through until you like it.
Yeah, it was. If it were something that I would have purchased for myself, I probably wouldn't have gotten past the first few glasses and ended up giving it to somebody as a gift, or just found a buddy who liked it and just passed it off. But since it was a gift from my wife, I figured I had to do the best I could to power through it. And by the time I powered through it, I really enjoyed it.
So am I going to grab this bottle of Chichibu to
No, you don't have to. You don't have to. There's a picture of it on the website.
Oh, okay.
So that was, and I figured out how to turn off the bings.
Nice.
Sorry to keep bugging you, but I'm really excited about this stuff. We'll say stuff. I'll edit it. So he's in line for a really good bottle of whiskey.
So, I mean, while you were gone, one of the questions was around Japanese whiskey and why Japanese whiskey was winning awards. And I kind of waxed poetic for about 5-10 minutes about the fact that, Japanese whiskey is at a time where a lot of distilleries are modernizing. They're kind of going back, and they're going to more manual processes because, in a lot of ways, if you look at Japanese culture, they held on to a lot of older historical cultural things at a time where everything was modernizing, and and it's this interesting social dichotomy where there's this incredible history of tradition mixed with this modernization. And I think no more is that true than in the whiskey production, where they're very, very adamant about making sure that the whiskey is produced in a sort of very, very traditional Scottish way. And I said that my classic line is that if you really want great Scottish traditional whiskey, you should go to Japan. So, yeah,
absolutely. No, the first few that I tried were just the standard, the Yamazaki 12, I think, and what is the other one that I actually have in my bar right now?
Hibiki?
Hibiki, yeah, the Hibiki 10 or 12, which they have at Costco, oddly enough. Or at least they did for a while. I don't think they had it anymore. And it was it was crazy cheap. It was like $39, and I picked up a bottle. It's really enjoyable, and it's everything that you expect from a Scotch whiskey, but it's just being made in Japan. But like you said, they're getting back to some more old school type ways to do things, almost like the way that they're doing the new Star Wars. I'll bring everything back to Star Wars, but they're doing more practical effects now. At least that's what they tell me.
Because sometimes the traditional way is the best.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have to have CG characters that suck.
Yeah,
that's all. Anyway,
exactly.
We can.
Misa gonna have some more whiskey.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, so what's this next one that we're drinking?
All right, so I'm really excited, and I actually cracked this bottle. That is, opened this bottle specifically to send you some. So this is a society bottle, and you can see this is way different than the other bottles. It doesn't have any distillery markings on it for a good reason. So this is it's called the Scotch and Malt Whiskey Society. I think they're in 14 or 16 countries around the world, including the United States. In Canada, you can go to smws.ca. In the States, you can go to smws.com. And what they offer is they essentially go to distilleries and say, look, we want to buy an entire cask of whiskey. And we want to have you guys bottle it, and we want to release it as a one-time bottling. So it's not going to be, mixed in or I don't want to say the word blended, but essentially when you make like say a Lafroig quarter cask, you want a consistent batch. You want every Lafroig quarter cask, whether it's bottled this year or the next, to taste the same. And the goal of the Malt Society is to get stuff that's unique. It's very different. It's got the characteristic of that distillery, but it's something that perhaps people haven't tried before. So in this case, what we're drinking is the official title is Distillery 29 Cask 131. So 29.131. The title is Buttercups, Bothies, and Barbecues. And the headline is... What's a bothy? I have no idea. It's an English term.
Sounds great. Buttercups are good and barbecues are good, but I don't know what a bothy is.
So believe it or not, this actually comes from Lafroig. This is a Lafroig cask.
Oh.
And when you smell it, I don't get any peat whatsoever on the nose. I mean, I just get tons of vanilla and sugar and sort of caramelized butterscotch maybe, but it's like it smells very, very sweet. Now I've had this obviously because I tasted it before I bought it, but this is 60.6% alcohol by volume, so it's a heater. All these Scotch and Malt Whiskey Society bottlings are cask strength, so they don't water them down, and they are limited bottling. So once that cask is gone, it's gone. I'm going to let you take a sip, and then I'm going to take a sip because I'm just dying to taste this. I haven't tasted this in ages.
That's my second sip, and it's oddly enough they're firing up their hogs across the street, and that kind of is reminiscent to the feeling that I get once when you feel that going down your chest, like I can hear the hog going down the street. That is a heater, my friend.
Yeah.
And you're right. I get no peat on the nose. It's sweet, mildly fruity, but it's a heater, big time. Then this is cask strength, you said, I believe.
Yeah, 16.6%. So this is probably a whiskey you would add water to, if only because bringing it down to 50% or even the high 40s is going to probably impart a lot more character. And the problem with cask strength is it does take your palate a while to acclimate. But I mean, right away on the taste, like I get a lot of that sort of salty, briny character, a little bit of coal, maybe some barbecue smoke. But I mean, it's a lot more complex than the first whiskey by far. I'm going to take a couple puffs here, see how it pairs with the cigar.
So my flavor experience, I've taken 3 sips, and it's very, very different and I hope I opened the right one, and I might have to go double check because what I'm tasting is very different than what you're tasting. Like to me, I almost taste like a salted caramel apple.
Yep.
In here, and it's not very smoky. There's a little bit of peat flavor in there, but not a ton. But it's sweet, and it's smooth until it gets right about
Right here.
which, you know, I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere, and if you're just saying you don't know what I was pointing at, but that's okay. But that's where I start to feel it. But the flavors on the tongue are really, really delightful. I know that's kind of a lame term, but I don't know another way to put it. Like a salted caramel apple doesn't suck. So that's what I smell that caramel in here too.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's interesting because with the Malt Society bottlings, you can get, you know, multiple different offerings from the same distillery, and that's what's so fascinating for me is that you get something that's unique even within the distillery. Like you taste this and you go, this doesn't taste like any Lafroig I've ever had in my life. This is 17 years old, so it is a pretty aged whiskey, originally distilled in 1995. The tasting notes, they say it's a coal sack full of sugar with vanilla, cloves, and barbecue, charred mackerel, caramelized onions, tar, ash, lavender, and coal. I don't know if I'm getting tar and ash, but maybe the lavender for sure.
Yeah, I'm just blown away that as heavy as it is, I mean, heavy's not the right term, as strong as it is, and it's tough. I mean, when once you swallow, it's tough in there. It burns a little bit, and but to get that much sweetness out of it, and then to find out that it's a Lafroig is really kind of fascinating for me.
Yeah. So, like I said, I think what's interesting to me about the Malt Society is that you do get these, you know, these unique bottlings, and once it's gone, it's gone. So, you know, I tend to nurse these pretty well. What I'm finding with the cigar, which is interesting, is that it does run over a lot of the sweetness off that broadleaf, but it's bringing a lot more of that sort of meaty, earthy quality that I'm used to with the broadleaf. Which is interesting because that was getting completely run over by the Lafroig, the quarter cask. I feel like the saltiness was just running over that. So this, I'd say, is more complementing the cigar than the quarter cask was, where the quarter cask I think was more contrast.
Yeah, I would agree. Losing some of the sweetness from the cigar, but you kind of get that on the finish, really.
Yeah,
and it does, like you said, bring out a lot more of that earthiness, a lot more of those thick flavors, that kind of dirtiness of it. Little woody notes in there too, actually, that weren't there before. Losing a lot of that sweetness, but the pairing is really nice. Excuse me. Between these two, because you get a lot of sweetness from the whiskey, you get that burn, and then when you come in after that burn, you take a puff of the cigar. It really kind of replenishes your palate a little bit, if that makes any sense, with some sweet. It's actually really, really pleasant. So,
while we enjoy these delicious whiskeys, I'm just going to move on to another question here. There's a good one from Bob Dog about. He says, "Once whiskey's in the bottle, does the flavor ever change over time?" And that's an interesting question. I know that there's, I think the wine industry has kind of created this bit of confusion over spirits or wines in a bottle. Once whiskey is added to a bottle, it is the best that whiskey will ever be. So you're not going to gain anything over time from leaving the whiskey in the bottle. In fact, ideally, you want to keep the bottle as full as possible, because once you start to deplete the bottle, the whiskey is going to oxidize. Now, it does take a lot of time. It's not like wine where, you know, you leave a wine out for a week. By the time that seventh day comes by, that wine is going to be like super flat. And there's ways to counteract that. You know, you can use that nitrogen spray stuff if you have a really nice bottle of whiskey and you don't think you're going to get through it anytime soon. It's a good option because it'll create a barrier between the whiskey and the air. So the only thing that I would recommend is that when you're pouring your whiskey, you do want to pour the whiskey in the glass and let it sit. I do find that, you know, whiskey, if you drink it immediately out of a glass, there's almost a bottle shock characteristic. Now, I know bottle shock isn't really a thing in whiskey, but there's almost a bottle shock characteristic to the whiskey when you just pour it and start drinking. So I tend to pour my whiskeys maybe 10 or 15 minutes, just let them sit there, kind of, do their thing and then taste. And I find that's kind of the optimal tasting experience. But the short answer to your question is the flavor will essentially get muted over time. So you're going to lose a lot of the characteristics over, let's say the course of a year or 2 years.
So if I find a bottle of Laphroaig that for whatever reason is 5 years old, there's nothing special about that?
No, absolutely not. So the 5-year-old Laphroaig is going to be whatever it was when they bottled it. Because of the way they bottle it, it's pretty sealed with the cork. It's probably going to be, in fact, it'll probably taste exactly the same as if you bought a bottle that was bottled this year or last year.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if you do find something you like, and let's say if it's limited or something, I mean, you could buy it, stick it in the closet, and it's going to be fine for years.
Yeah, ideally you want to keep the whiskey out of direct sunlight. That would be the best. You want to keep the temperature fairly consistent, because if you have temperature changes, it's going to cause the alcohol to evaporate a little bit in the bottle and change it. So, it's like cigars. Consistency is key.
Well, that's interesting. I always figured that age did something. But it's interesting because age is supposed to be good for wine, but it's kind of bottled the same way, no?
Yep, very much the same way. Absolutely.
So maybe we're going on a tangent here, but like an aged bottle of wine gets better, right?
That's right. So, the reason for that is, and we can have Tony Bellato back on the show because he can talk to wine a lot better than I can. But yeah, once whiskey has finished the fermented process, there's no sugars left in the whiskey to age or get more complex over time. So, when you have a 10-year whiskey, whether you buy that 10-year whiskey 2 years ago or 5 years from now, it's ideally, and this isn't really true because you're dealing with different batches of whiskey, but the goal is to have the whiskey taste exactly the same 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, as it does today, as it does 2 years from now, as it does 5 years from now, as it does 10 years from now.
Okay, so it's not necessarily the bottling; it's the process that
that's right.
Whiskey's made. Okay,
that's right. So whiskey does not change over time.
Okay, so that's good to know. I had no idea. I always learn something on these shows.
And I'm going to ask. I know we're running up against time here on the FRN segment. We're keeping track, but
yeah, we got
time.
Like 15 minutes.
I'm gonna go Bob Dog's question here about is there any advantage to decanting a whiskey? Definitely not. Once you take it out of a bottle, you probably don't want to put it back in the bottle because it's had a lot of exposure to oxygen. In fact, in a lot of cases, decanters are made of lead. Still want to add a high alcohol spirit to a leaded crystal decanter, because what will actually happen, it'll leach the lead out of the decanter. So first of all, safety tip, if you go out and buy a decanter, probably a good idea to buy lead-free crystal decanter. And there's lots out there. You can go to Amazon. Tell them I sent you. They won't give you a discount, but just tell them I sent you. But it'll be lead-free, which is good. So really, ideally, you want to keep your whiskey in the original bottle that it came in, and then just pour it, ad hoc as you want.
Yeah, if you decant the bottle of whiskey, then you get the whole thing out. It's like you pour the whole. Like I think of decanting a bottle of wine. You decant the whole thing because you're going to drink the whole thing that night, or at least we. I don't know if that's everybody else.
I mean, wine is, once you open it up, that wine is it's going to drop very quickly in quality.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Anyway, okay. So should we move on to the last one? Because we're running out of cigar here. Yeah,
we're running out of cigar. So our last whiskey tonight is kind of an interesting one. This is going to be a bit of a heater. This is Ardbeg Ugadel. This is definitely the deep end. When people think about really, really peaty whiskeys, they think about Ardbeg. The interesting thing is that Ardbeg is not really that peaty, believe it or not. There are peatier Ardbegs out there, and really, when Ardbeg talks about whiskey, they aren't really looking for a blast. Like there's sort of this almost this arms race where people think the peatier the better, the peatier the stronger. Really, they're looking to make a really nice balanced whiskey that's delicious, that has some peat quality to it. They're not looking to just blow your face off with this characteristic of peat. Ardbeg, like Lefroy, was founded in 1815. Much smaller distillery. They only produce 1.1 million liters a year. John, what's a liter? Well, it's 290,000 Freedom gallons, so very small. They originally closed down in 1983, and then they reopened in 1989. You find that a lot in some of the distilleries in Scotland, where they have a history of closing and reopening because of money. And what's interesting is they get their malt, their peated malt, from Port Ellen. And I kind of talked about that earlier in the show. Port Ellen does a lot of maltings. And I think what's good about Port Ellen is they're very conscientious about peat is it is a renewable resource, but it's a slowly renewable resource. So it does take time for the peat to sort of grow back. And as a result, they have a closed peating system, which is much more efficient at using the peat. So they're going through less peat than they would in the past, getting a lot more out of it. The Ugadale comes from the water source. So Ardbeg gets their sources their water from Loch Arnabeast, I believe is how it's pronounced. And then obviously the other loch is Loch Ugadale. And so that's they named the whiskey Ardbeg Ugadale as a tribute to their water source.
You know so much about this stuff.
I like to read. I don't work a lot these days, so do some reading, do some drinking.
It's funny, we talked about how much you don't read just before we went online.
Mm-hmm.
And now you tell me that you like to read. I guess it's all on the topic.
Woo.
So this is definitely a heater, man.
Nelly.
And you say it doesn't have that much peat flavor in it, but in comparison to what we just had, this will blow you right out.
I mean, this is the broadleaf of of whiskeys.
Yeah. Show us your Lajero, exactly.
I mean, this is very chewy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting is this was named the World Whiskey of the Year in 2009 by Jim Murray. Jim Murray, of course, does a whiskey Bible. He famously made the Yamazaki 18 the whiskey of the year a couple of years ago. And thanks, Jim, because now none of us can get the Yamazaki 18. Really appreciate it. Fortunately, the Ugadale is still regularly available. Probably because it's peated whiskey, it didn't have such a run like the Yamazaki did. But man, is this ever chewy?
Yeah, the nose on it. There's a lot of maple on it, actually. That's what I'm smelling. If that makes any sense. I'm tasting it.
Yeah.
But that's what I smell.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is 54.2%. So it is a bit of a, I mean, obviously comparative to the last whiskey we had, which was 60%. It's a step down, but I mean, 54% is no joke.
Yeah, we're not screwing around at all.
And what's interesting is, so they take the original Ardbeg and then they call it marrying. So this is sort of the combination of multiple different whiskeys in the distillery, and they marry it with some ex-sherry cask. And I think, the sherry cask is really evident because you do get a lot of that fruity note and a lot of that sweet, which is offsetting the peat. But I mean, it's a beefy whiskey.
Yeah, it's a much bolder than the previous offering. Real peaty, and I don't know that. I think that we, at least the whiskeys that I've tried today, I think the Chichibu wasn't strong enough from a peat standpoint, and I think the Ardbeg is too strong. So I feel like the pairing with this cigar falls somewhere in the middle there. I mean, even with like a standard Lefroy 10-year, which is, I guess, the kind of their intro, I think that even that might be a little bit better than this Ardbeg. I think the Ardbeg is good on its own. The pairing for me is a little bit off because I think it kind of runs over. It's a little bit too much, I think, for this pairing. Yeah,
I agree. I think it's too full-bodied. I think the Ardbeg would be really ideal with maybe a Kentucky Fire Cured cigar.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Because I think the Kentucky Fire Cured tobacco tends to run over a lot of spirits and beers. And I think, this so far, my experience in the DRAM Cask 4, I think the wheelhouse is really that Lafroig quarter cask, maybe that Lagavulin, 16 Lagavulin 16 Distillers Edition. You know, maybe a Jim Beam, like a really peppery Jim Beam, would be kind of where that cigar is. Because anything more full bodied than on the whiskey spectrum it's just too much.
No, I would agree. The cigar is a lot sweeter than I anticipated. It doesn't have. I mean, it's got some of those dirty notes, but it doesn't have that spice that we were anticipating. And now I don't know if something with a big spice would be better paired with some of this peaty stuff. I like your idea of doing fire cured. Maybe that's a future show, because that saltiness that you get from the fire cured, especially when just on those first KFC releases from Drew Estate, because they use that right around at the tip, so you're tasting it and you really get that saltiness from it. And I think that would play really, really well with something that's got a strong peat flavor to it. So I think that could be an interesting show. I almost want to do another show with this for and try a few different things, because we've got a lot to play with. It's a really good cigar, and I think we could have a little bit more fun with it, I think.
Yeah, I think it would actually be interesting to just try whiskeys that we know probably won't be a good pairing, like a delicate whiskey with a sherried whiskey with a peated whiskey, or you know, just mix and match. Maybe throw some bourbons into the mix, just because, you know, we're all about having fun on sharing our pairings.
No, it's the offering that we had in the middle, or the one that we had in the middle. The what was it?
The Scotch and Malt Whiskey Society's 29 131.
29 131 or whatever it was. That pairing was the best, and I think finding something along those lines, and that was a little bit sweeter than the others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I definitely want to revisit this. I think we have a few more samples. Maybe we could do another show, but I do like the idea of trying something with a fire cured wrapper on it as well. That'd be kind of interesting.
So as we come up to the end of our AFRN segment, I'm just going to try and get a couple questions through here. Seth has an interesting question. He asks, are there vintages with whiskey? And that's an interesting question. Yes. So there's a couple different ways you can look at that. First of all, there's age statement whiskey, which means that the whiskey has been aged in a barrel for a set period of time. And I won't, because we don't have enough time, I won't bore everyone with the details, but there's a minimum age statement. And when you declare an age statement on a whiskey for Scottish whiskey by law, so typically what you'll see is, you know, 10, 12, 15, 18, 21 is pretty standard. When you start getting over 21, it gets pretty pricey. And the idea is that this whiskey's been matured in a whatever kind of barrel for that period of time and then bottled. And that means that the minimum age of the whiskey is that. So what's interesting about that is you can have a 15-year whiskey, but it could have been vatted with some 18-year whiskey or some 20-year whiskey or even some 25-year whiskey. You don't know for sure. But by law, you know that the youngest whiskey in that vatting has been 15 years old. So a lot of the stuff we were drinking tonight, with the exception of the Scotch and Malt Whiskey Society, was no age statement. And what that means is you don't know how old the whiskey that went into that is. It could have been 5 years. It could have been 3. Well, and specifically, we know with the Chichibu, it couldn't have been that old because Chichibu has only been around for a few years. So with the Chichibu, we know that whiskey is probably only about 3 years old. It doesn't have an age statement on it, but we know because the distillery's only been open so long, they can't possibly have had whiskey that's older than that. I just want to take a shout out, because we didn't have an opportunity earlier, to remind our viewers that you're listening to Sharing Our Pairings, episode 34, DRAM Cask Cigars. And this segment is brought to you by DRAM Cigars. You can visit them at dramcigars.com. DRAM Cigars, they're the best cigar to pair with whiskey. Check them out if you haven't already. We've already done 3 shows on DRAM, and this is our 4th show. Going pretty well so far, and I think we have a consensus that the Scotch and Malt Whiskey Society bottling probably came out on top, and interestingly had the least peaty element to it, I think, of the 3 whiskeys we tried tonight.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm sitting here thinking of the stuff that we've done, or the whiskeys that we tried on the show, or the whiskeys that I've tried, just on my own. What would be the best to pair with this cigar? And I really want to do this again, and like you said, I want to kind of play around with some very different stuff, and just see. Maybe we could have a show where we do like 6, and just get completely
gunned.
Just get gooned by the time we're done. Gooned, that's what you guys say, right?
Gooned, yeah.
Gooned? See, I'm international.
Well, I think that probably brings us up on our end of our AFRN segment here. I just want to thank everyone on the AFRN Armed Forces Radio Network for listening to our show. As Rob says all the time, thanks so much for your service. Thanks for doing out there and protecting all of us, whether you're Canadian, probably not listening to the Armed Forces Radio Network, but as a Canadian, I want to thank all the Americans out there, because you guys don't just protect America, you do protect Canada as well, and we appreciate that. Thanks everyone else for tuning in. It's been a pretty good show.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I really like the cigar, to be frank. I mean, it's the blend is really nice, and it's real smooth at the end. I mean, we're getting down to right down towards the end, and it's really, yeah, it smoked really fast. That's one thing that surprised me a little bit, is it smoked pretty quick. I mean, we've only been smoking this for about, I don't know, an hour and 10 minutes.
An hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 20, yeah.
For a Toro, that's burning pretty quick, but real enjoyable. But yeah, the whiskeys are great. So John, thank you for sharing those with me, and everybody, thanks for tuning in.
And we're back.
Yeah, we're still here.
We're still here. So that was just our end of our Armed Forces Radio Network. We're not going to cuss, because we're classy like that. I think I want to answer a couple more questions here, because appreciate the audience questions. On is a regular on Cigar Federation. He is a huge whiskey fiend, and he has a question. He says, the overpowering flavor from some of these beverages can really impact your smoking experience. And I think we've definitely found that to be true, whether it's beer, bourbon, or whiskey, or if it's maybe a ginger ale and a Gloria Serie R. What cigars pair best with an Ardbeg? Spice and spice, he asks. Well, that's an interesting question. I think we generally found, because we've been doing the show now for more than a year. That's right, we are the pioneers of broadcast, podcast, pairing show. I think there's probably other shows out there, but I'm gonna say we are the first. I think Ardbeg is a to use cigar terminologies, it's a full-bodied whiskey, and I think if you're going to pair Ardbeg, you really need to pair it with a full-bodied cigar. It's one of those things where you need to match strength with strength. So while the DRAM Cask cigar number 4 is really tasty, it's a and they describe it as a medium plus, medium full, and I think that's pretty accurate. I think if you want to get into pairing with an Ardbeg, you really got to get into something that's full, and I think what immediately comes to mind is maybe some stuff out of Skip Shop, maybe some Neanderthals, maybe some Cro-Magnons. I think they might stand up really well, because that's a really full-bodied cigar, like full-bodied plus in some cases, and I think that might stand up to an Ardbeg, and I think that might be a future show for us. What do you think, Rob?
I would agree. I think the way they describe this DRAM Cask 4 is, they call it rich, and it really does have a rich profile. It's full-bodied, and there's a ton of flavor in there. I don't know if I'd call it full strength, medium plus maybe, because I didn't get a ton of strength out of it. Enough, but not a ton. Sorry for the background, but my internet was crapping out in the office, so I had to come sit outside my garage here. But when you start talking about the Ardbeg, which is the last one that we had, or something that's really, really peaty, really, really full body, I really like that idea of going with a KFC. I think the saltiness you get from that wrapper is really going to really impact your experience and pair nicely. Or something on that peppery side, like you were talking about, something from Skip falls into that category. What else am I thinking of that's going to have? Mainly the cigars that I tend to avoid. Like something that's got a big pepper bomb is something that you're gonna. A cigar that would probably work is that Nomad C276.
That's a heater.
That's a really good cigar, and it's actually a cigar that I really, really enjoy, even though it's not really in my wheelhouse. But that profile might stand up to something like that. It's got a rich flavor to it. There's some sweetness there, but there's also a lot of spice. And I think that's what was missing from the DRAM Cask number 4 to keep up with a Scotch that's that peaty and that full body. This cigar was just too. It was too rich, if that makes sense. I mean, it's not a bad thing. I think it's a great thing. It was a nice, rich profile. I really enjoyed it. But for something that's that peaty, it's going to get run over. So yeah, I like your idea of the KFC. I like your idea of some of Skip's cigars. Anything that's got a lot of Esteli Lajero in it.
Lajero.
Sure.
Got that Condega, son.
Condega is a bit sweeter, though. I mean, if you go, something that's got a lot of that Esteli, that's got that punch and that that pepper, that spice to it, that's probably going to work out pretty well. Like maybe Hoya Antonio, 1970, or the.
That's a beefy cigar.
Yeah, I mean, something that's really got some that's strong as balls, as they say.
Strong as balls.
That might work.
I think what was really interesting to me is that the Malt Society bottling stood up really, really well, and it's a different flavor profile than the other two whiskeys. And I'm going to take that opportunity to answer one of the last questions here by Bob Dog, because he was saying that he noticed our first and third pairings were the same, and he wanted to know why we had different choices for the second pairing. Part of that is just the selection I sent down to Rob, and part of that is I like to switch it up. I know inherently there's going to be some pairings that are going to work really well. One of the pairings they recommended was the Lafroy Quarter Cask, and I think the Lafroy Quarter Cask was a no-brainer. That's absolutely paired well with the cigar. I would pair that again, and maybe I'll do it tomorrow. Who knows? But I like to switch it up. I like to add things. If you listen to our previous podcasts, please do go to YouTube, listen to our podcast, like and subscribe to our channel. We like to switch it up. We like to challenge the status quo and try different things. And I think this Malt Society bottling was one of the things that we did differently this time, where we went with something that breaks the mold of the profile. And as a result, it worked really well. So it'd be interesting to revisit the DRAM Cask number 4 with something really heavily sherried. I'd be interested to try maybe Abanda, maybe an Amrut, which was extremely peppery, sherried, and it might be interesting. It might be a cool combination.
Yeah. So, was Bob Dog's question why it was? So we both did the Ardbeg and we both did the Malt Society, but the first one that we did was different. Correct. So he was asking why did you have one and I had a different one?
That's right.
Another thing that we want to do with these shows is, as the police are going to get me here, we want to, in one show, experience as much as we can. So it's for our benefit, it's for the benefit of the listeners and the viewers, to go with as many pairings as possible. Usually we have, if we're doing beer or something, we're 6 or 8 different beers altogether. We rarely end up with the same thing. In this situation, John's got a vast whiskey library, and he let me take advantage of that.
It's quite huge.
Yeah.
It's very huge.
It is. You've got quite a collection, so it's cool for me because I'm trying stuff that I'd never tried before. I think that's part of our goal, is to experience as many pairings as we can, and we can't really do that with the cigars that we're smoking. We can't really smoke a different cigar for each pairing because that just really blows out your palate. So going with a few different beverages is probably the easiest way to do it. And I think that's worked pretty well so far, just so we can have the most different things. And sometimes we'll switch it up where we're smoking the same cigar, where we're smoking different cigars, but we're pairing it with the same stuff, or that kind of thing. And when we've changed it up a few different ways, but I think the ultimate goal is to get as many different pairings as we can.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of the fun. I think, we found with our IPA show that we confounded expectations, and to me, I think it's more interesting for me to go into a show and find something that works that I didn't think was going to work than to go, yeah, the Ford Quarter Cask worked really well with this cigar. that's great. And I mean, it's good. And, you know, it's on their website, and that's a safe pairing. Go for it. But we don't necessarily like to play it fast and safe. We like to play it fast and loose. So, you know, hey, maybe we'll go 2 whiskeys and a beer. I mean, we're crazy here, but, you know, that's part
I
of the
don't
fun
think
we
that
get to
happens.
experiment. No, it didn't happen, but, you know, it
But
could
I get
happen.
your point. I get your point that you want to. Yeah, I mean, we just want to do it as. I mean, we only get to do one show every 2 weeks, give or take. So you know, getting as many different pairings as we can in is the best way for us to do it. But I think it's a plus or minus both ways. I mean, if we're smoking the same thing and we're drinking the same thing, we are viewing it from 2 different perspectives. So there's positives both ways.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
I think that's it. Bob Dog just had a comment that he thought it was interesting to hear our notes in the same beverage, and we appreciate that, Bob. You know, we tried. I think you know, we've kind of migrated from our beer pairings where we had, like Rob was saying, 6 or even 8 completely different beers, to maybe having some overlap, because I think, you know, we've heard feedback, and we appreciate your feedback and all of our audience feedback, whether you're listening by podcast or live on YouTube on Cigar Federation. We like that feedback. I mean, that's what keeps the show going for us. Also, the huge buckets of money, you know, that keeps. Yeah. So that feedback really, you know, that's what keeps the show going. I mean, I enjoy pairing, and Rob enjoys pairing. We appreciate your guys' participation, asking questions. So, you know, we try to have some overlap on some of the pairings we have, so that we can talk about some of the same notes, and you know, can see whether I've got a janky palate or Rob's got a janky palate, or in a lot of cases, you know, we you know, agree. And if you go back to some of the previous shows, you know, you'll find some of the stuff we've paired together worked really well, and we both said this worked really well, or we said, you know, maybe this wasn't the best pairing. And that being said, it's nice to have variety. And like Rob was saying, this is the great part about the show, is we get to try a ton of different stuff that you maybe aren't going to try on your own with one cigar.
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing we run into, and I think it was maybe not evident with this show, but this was a discussion that we had a little bit beforehand, is trying to keep, when you start talking about peated whiskeys and, you know, things that are going to be, you know, on that end of the spectrum, Islay whiskeys, is finding stuff that's common enough that people can get their hands on. I mean, talking about the Chichibu, the peated is fantastic, but I've been looking for a bottle for 6 months and I can't find one. So
We can't all be Victor Vitale, and like,
yeah.
I can call my whiskey guy. My whiskey guy's Andrew at the Kensington Wine Market, and I can be like, hey, Andrew, you got a bottle of Chichibu the Peated for me? And he'll go, first of all, who is this?
And you are who?
You are, and second of all, I go, no, that's been sold through for like a year, man. You know that. So yeah, we can't all have, you know, we can't all have a guy.
Yeah.
So we do want stuff that you can go over to your local, what is it, Benny's? Bevmo?
I have Bevmo, yeah.
Bevmo?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Jared apparently has one that's by him that's pretty good. They had bottle of Stranahan's and that, what was the other one?
I don't even know. He sent me the picture, and I just threw my phone down in disgust, because I was like, man, to walk in and just be able to pick a bottle of Stranahan's off the shelf, like, come on, man.
Yeah.
That's not fair.
And I did actually return the favor a little bit. I brought John some Stranahan's and some of the Stranahan's Snowflake from this year. And those were courtesy of another Sig Fed member who was nice enough to hook me up. That Snowflake, they do 1,600 bottles, I think. I think that's it.
There's not a lot.
Yeah, each one's individually numbered. I don't know how many casks that is, or freedom units, or whatever.
That could be one cask.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe that's how they do it. All the details are on the bottle. Maybe we'll do that on one show, because I've been very sparing in my my tasting of that. I actually, and it's I'm glad that you said that you opened that other bottle to share with me. I opened that bottle. You didn't get the first pour, but I opened but you got the second.
I can say that you got the first pour from my Scotch and Malt Whiskey Society bottle.
Now I'm the ass. That's all
But
right.
it doesn't matter because the first pour tastes the same as the second pour.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. It's more of a ceremonial thing.
But yeah, I mean, this is like we said, this is kind of the fun of the show is mixing and matching and trying different things. And we're gonna have different shows. We're gonna have more guests, I think, in the last half of this year. We didn't have a ton of guests last year, but in the next few weeks, we're gonna have Twin Engine. We're gonna have Colin on the show for some coffee pairing, which I'm really looking forward to. Rob was kind enough to send me some coffee samples, the Twin Engine forward. We're gonna have Victor on the show, and that's gonna be a show that's gonna be wild and crazy because we're just gonna go nuts with the whiskey. Victor's a fun guy. And I know we've had some other people reach out to us, Enrique and other manufacturers. Excuse me, who have expressed interest in being on the show and doing some pairings. So we're gonna aspire to have some more guests. It'll be fun.
Yeah, that brings a different element to the show. I think we've only had a handful,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll branch out too and do some more coffee stuff, and not everything has to have alcohol in it. It can,
Doesn't it though? Doesn't it have to have alcohol in it though?
Doesn't have to.
Okay, fair enough.
It's usually better if it does, but it doesn't have to.
So as we wrap it up, Bob Dog slipped in another question because he's just going crazy. I'm sorry we don't have any giveaways for you today, but Bob Dog wants to know what your overall thoughts are on the DRAM 4. I'm just going to jump in here and say, surprisingly for me, now that we've done all 4, I would say that DRAM Cask number 1 was my favorite, which is surprising because you guys know I live in the medium full spectrum, kind of like a mini Logan, if that's even a thing. And only because the DRAM Cask number 1 was so versatile, I felt that it paired really well with some of the whiskeys we were doing. It was a no-brainer pairing with coffee, but it stood so well on its own. And I would say that DRAM Cask number 4 would probably fall as number 2 for me. What do you say, Rob?
Yeah, I don't like it when you answer before me because we
Sorry,
usually agree. Yeah, Dramcast number 1, I think it's the best. It's the best in the line. It's the best as far as pairing is concerned. It's the best as far as just the cigar on its own. Like you said, it's versatile in the sense that you can pair it with a couple of different things. Man, I look all tore up, hair coming out everywhere. Whew. 8 months into letting my hair grow out, it's getting rough, man. Yeah, I think that one was my favorite, and Dramcast number 4 was a second for me. Although the Dramcast number 3 was up there too, and I've smoked that cigar since the show, and I smoked it on its own. Didn't pair it with anything, and it had a nice profile to it, some nice spice to it. I almost feel like maybe Dramcast number 3 could take on some of the peaty stuff too, because it's got that strong spice to it. And I really did like that cigar. The only one that really is lost on me is number 2, and I think I would just have to revisit number 2. But I remember all the other ones pretty vividly, and that means if you smoke a cigar and 6 months later you remember it, it must have been pretty good.
Yeah, and I think if there were to be a DRAM Cask number 5, and I don't know if there's going to be a DRAM Cask number 5 or not, but I think what would be interesting would be to go with something like Rob was saying that has that Esteli Ligero that is just like just punch you in the mouth, a Logan-esque Ligero, super full bodied, and to be paired with only like the fullest of whiskeys or the fullest of bourbons. But I think the DRAM Cask 1 through 4 gives you a lot of different options. It's pretty versatile. And you've said this time and time again, what's really great about the website is you can go on there, you can look at the whiskeys and say, well, I like that whiskey, so that cigar is probably the good pick for me. And the chart is just it's simplistic and yet so complete in what it offers for information. I think
It's concise.
Concise, a good word.
And I like it when things are concise. But yeah, check out their website, dramcigars.com. I think you're right. That would be the only thing that's missing from their offerings. And I remember we had Joe on a Cigar Chat episode, and that camera's doing something funky. And I know that there's going to be some stuff coming up. So I don't know if there's a number 4 or number 5 coming, or if there's some limited edition stuff coming. I know they were talking about doing some different sizes and things. So we'll see.
If you haven't checked out the IPCPR coverage, I mean, we worked our tails off, so definitely check out the videos. We got a really cool interview with Joe. You can either go to cigarfederation.com, or you can check out our IPCPR 2015 coverage on YouTube. Really good stuff on there.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in, whether you're listening live or whether you're tuning into our podcast, which unfortunately will be up a couple days later than normally would. So apologize, but we had a ton of coverage from IPCPR, which took up our podcast space. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And as we say, make sure to drink better, but drink less.